Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. One of the magic things about a virtual Games for Change festival, I bet, is joining from a broad diversity of time zones. I'm personally in the West Coast myself, so it is a lovely 11:30 right now. Thanks so much for coming out. This is kind of the session follow-up session to the chain reaction game that was actually played during workshop week last Tuesday. So for those of you who are able to play our game, learn a little bit more about the history of nuclear testing, thanks so much for coming out to this session. We hope to continue our discussion. And for those of you who have no idea who we are, what chain reaction is, what we do, what the game was like, we'll bring you up to speed with these slides and look forward to having an edifying discussion regardless. So who are we? Who are these people whose faces you see? My name is Derek, Derek Shan. I am a producer on the Chain Reaction team. These other fine, lovely faces here are the folks of Chain Reaction. We are all graduate students from the Entertainment Technology Center, a grad school division of Carnegie Mellon. And from January to May, we worked with the Games for Change Festival to create a multiplayer point-and-click role-playing game about nuclear testing played at the Games for Change Festival. So that's a lot of words, but what does that really mean in context? So there's two big parts of this game, Chain Reaction, that we made. The first is a multiplayer role-playing game, as you can see on the left of the slide. Folks hop into a Zoom call or a video conferencing call and kind of do some light role-playing in character on camera. And at various points during the game that's hosted over Zoom, we as NPCs, as well as people on the dev team, we as DMs/NPCs point them to a point-and-click build that we made in WebGL. So last week, we executed the game with 30 to 30-ish players over Zoom, as opposed to the platform you're on right now, Hopin, and had a great time. So just digging in a little bit more about why nuclear policy, why the game was shaped the way it is. We created this game really to make a lasting transformation in those who would play it. This term transformation comes from this theoretical framework called the transformational framework, kind of an 8-pointed star on how to create games and experiences that transform or meaningfully change the people who play the game and leave a lasting change even after they're finished playing. So the first transformation we were looking at was a knowledge transformation. We wanted our players to walk away thinking, now I know more about different histories involved in nuclear testing. Kind of one step above that is our belief transformation. Now I know that my initial understanding of nuclear testing was incomplete. And finally, an attitude transformation. Previously unknown perspectives and opinions on nuclear testing are important to me. So these are some very fine and nuanced transformations that were actually really important in us in our development process, which we can dig into after unpacking what exactly we made. So to talk about a little more on the game flow, I'll kick it over to our point game designer, Kat.
Thanks, Derek. Yes, okay. The slides remote is working. So to go over the game flow in a bit more detail, our whole game was played over 4 different phases. The introduction phase was where players were introduced to the story and assigned to one of 4 teams. The investigation phase is where players in team-based breakout rooms entered our WebGL build. Here is where they found real artifacts about nuclear testing and discussed them with their teammates. And finally, the discussion and voting phase brought our players back into the main Zoom room from the breakout rooms. All 4 teams came back together to hear each team's perspective and vote on which team would ultimately be a winner of the game and which team would be a loser. Our narrative casts our players as interns assigned to Department of Energy, Centers for Disease Control, Department of Defense, or the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. Our players' role in the story is helping their department heads with a fictional bill going through the Senate Budgetary Committee. Our bill was called the Nuclear Testing Legacy Act and aimed to bring the legacy of nuclear testing into the 21st century. Each of these organizations is competing for limited funding for this bill. Members of our team that you see below acted as the department heads. The department heads and the senator running the hearing explained that Dr. Charles Nolan was meant to be the star witness for the bill at the Budget Committee hearing. Dr. Nolan is a fictional character based on real physicians who worked at Los Alamos and the Nevada test site. However, our Dr. Nolan character has suddenly passed away, and the hearing is subsequently canceled. At this point, in order to save the Nuclear Testing Legacy Act, the interns take on an active role with putting together last-minute testimony to help achieve a part of the bill's limited funding for their department. In our WebGL build, they explore his office at the test site, view artifacts with real historical facts about testing, and choose which artifacts will ultimately help their organization gain some funding. There are 12 artifacts that the players can find hidden in various places, including images, letters, news articles, government reports, and audio recordings. The factual content of the artifacts is all historically accurate, though they're paraphrased and simplified to help our players get to the important ideas behind this complex issue. For each artifact, the players can see a summary of their department's most important takeaway for a particular artifact. For example, this is a letter speaking about nuclear testing's medical impact on downwinder communities, and the Department of Defense's summary emphasizes that supercomputer-based stockpile stewardship technology prevents these harms from ever happening again. So that's what the Department of Defense is getting out of this letter. Whereas the CDC's summary emphasizes the point in the letter about health impacts persisting through generations, because health is what is more relevant to their personal perspective. So once the interns have all decided which artifacts are most important, the players on each team discuss exactly what they want to say to the Senate when we go back to the main session from the breakout rooms. Our players create a slide deck collaboratively with their other teammates. They nominate 2 interns to speak in the main session on specific pieces of evidence. After presenting all the testimonies and listening to the reasons from each organization about why they should receive the funds, the players return to the WebGL build for one last activity at the very end of the game. They're given the chance to vote for the 2 organizations that they believe will create the best outcomes and best impact the legacy of US nuclear testing. When the senator announces the results, our gameplay ends. Now I'm going to talk a bit about how we got here and the research that we did. When the Games for Change and CMU Entertainment Technology Center collaboration kicked off for the year, we were given the overarching topic of nuclear threat. We spent about a month going through and refining our domain map. This is various different topics that we could have chosen to explore with a nuclear threat. So ultimately, we did decide that intersectionality and culture were areas that we particularly wanted to target, but we didn't want to lose sight of these other areas like history and politics. So that is where nuclear threat sort of definitely became the topic of nuclear testing, where we decided to narrow it down because nuclear testing is a historical event. It involves science, it involves philosophy, and all of these different topics can be part of our topic. Oh boy, these slides are different than what I thought they were going to be. Yeah, I can talk about the subject matter experts here. Our subject matter experts definitely helped us with refining our topic even further. They helped us figure out exactly what we had to ask, and we did ultimately end up using them as playtesters. We went through about 5 or 6 different rounds of playtesting in order to make sure that our content was historically accurate, transformationally accurate, and even just that it worked on various different machines because we're all remote and we don't really have much control over what hardware people are using. So our playtesting was a super important part of that. But ultimately, one thing that our subject matter experts helped us with the most is introducing us to various different perspectives. As you can see from how our game ended up shaking out, the conflicts between different perspectives and different organizations' priorities is pretty central to our design. And so through us independently doing our own research, coming together to talk about our different opinions on the research, and then talking with our subject matter experts about our research's actual impact on the world, that led us to know that, hey, presenting different opinions and talking about the conflicts between them is a really cool space for transformational design. So now we have our special thanks to our client, Raul, our experts, our faculty mentors, Dave and Brenda. I see them in the attendees, and specifically our live actor, Jack McLean, who was not part of our design team, but stepped up as both a Games for Change intern right now and as one of our actors who acted as the department head for ICANN during our game. We'd also like to thank our many, many, many different playtesters during our 5 or 6 or 7 rounds of playtesting that happened to refine our game into something that was going to be really transformationally cool. So to sum it all up, we are Chain Reaction. We created a multiplayer point-and-click role-playing game on the topic of nuclear testing for a Games for Change workshop week session. We're now open to any questions that you have about our design, our research process, our tech, our art, or anything to do with how we put this all together. Yeah, we have a space if anyone wants to join with voice or video. We can approve you to ask your question live if you want, or in chat, or however you would like. What kind of nuclear testing? That is a really good question, because there's actually a few different types. So we focused the most on nuclear test detonations, primarily weapons-based detonations that happened in the 1960s and before in the Western US. So there, yeah, obviously there's a lot of different options there. We could have gone with the Pacific Proving Grounds. We could have gone with Project Plowshare, which was applications of nuclear detonations for peaceful purposes. We could have gone with stockpile stewardship-based testing, underground testing, but we did primarily want to focus on testing detonations that happened in the Western US to narrow our scope, and because those like health impacts and impacts on the economy and things like that were sort of the most dramatic and most long lasting.
Yeah. Excuse me. We have a great question from Diane Reese. Can you also remind us of the target audience for this game? Anyone on the team want to tackle that one?
Sure, I'll go for that one. So our target audience for the game did evolve over the semester. First, we were designing for a Games for Change festival session, which can be literally anyone who wants to attend the festival. But as we moved into a workshop week, we wanted it to be more of an instructive process for people who are interested in nuclear topics and people who are interested in transformational games. So demographically, what that means is that our Games for Change audience, a smaller subset of the Games for Change audience that is willing to put in extra time during workshop week on interactive stuff. So our actual audience that we had in our session was educators, policy people. We had a few people from different game studios, and a few people from different community organizations. We had a few from some presidential libraries, a few who are high school teachers, and some professors of game design and of policy from all around the world, actually. It was pretty cool to see that it wasn't limited to one specific area.
Yeah, I think just the other note on that, like, audience, target audience is, we kind of knew, right, that our audience at the Games for Change Festival would skew like above high school or middle school students. And I think it's worth noting this game would look very different if you were to try to bring this into a classroom, just drop the WebGL build on their laps. And, you know, I would at least say, like, yeah, right, it would be very different with a different sort of target audience. We just knew Games for Change would be our designated venue. The next question was from Rebecca Wolfinger. What was the hardest part of the design process? I can kick that off. Would love to hear from anyone on the team. I think the hardest part of the design process as the producer, I think the most novel part of that process was the pre-production. Just the amount of work that went into helping us make up the difference in our understanding of nuclear testing as an issue, even before fingers went to making code or art assets were made. I think that was one of the hardest / most interesting part of this design / development process. Anything from Oscar, Claire? Any thoughts on what was hard for you guys?
Like from our perspective, I think what we are always trying to do is to add the stories to the environment. So that's one specific thing that I was focusing on when I was doing the environmental art, because you want to see the environment. The environment is always telling you the story. And another thing that challenged us the most is that like when we are making the script, like all the sentences we give to the character, we are also trying to like put the characteristics and personalities into the words that they speak, so it can somehow deliver the message from the character. Yeah.
Mhm. Going off of that, from a narrative perspective, it was definitely a challenge to balance the, like, frankly ridiculous complexity of this topic with getting players to the ideas that we wanted them to discuss. So just as an example, one of the artifacts that you can find in the room is something called the Ladry report. We present it as a old school slide deck, and just have sort of 1 or 2 facts on each slide and a picture. What the Ladry report is in reality is a 120-page PDF. So going through that and figuring out exactly what was most important and what would resonate with our audience, what would resonate with the different teams, with the objectives that we're going to give them to find things that help out with their team. It was really tough, but I think that based on the discussions that we did have during the week, it ended up pretty well.
Yeah, just want to get through these. There are some great questions in chat. So this one's from Rachel Zilberg. How did you balance the fun of the game with the clarity of its message? I can take a stab at that. Anyone else on the team? No, I mean, I keep gesturing to the team just because so many these were questions that many people up here had very strong opinions about back during the design process. Off the top of my head, like balancing the fun of the game with the clarity of its message, I think I think one great finding we had in the design process was because the issue is so complex. It's almost to say that a clarity of message, the game's message, right, is that things are rarely clear. You know, we created a game with 4 different departments, 3 from the United States government, 1 that's an international NGO. It in some ways, like the biggest message from our game was lack of clarity or like multi-perspectiveness. And so we really tried to design a game where where we put something in front of our players and that they could start having opinions about it, as well as designing for moments where individual people having individual opinions would have to share within their department, right, and come to some sort of consensus together before having the consensus of their department pitted against 3 other organizations. I think for us the fun really came out of what can we put in front of a player that is interesting to look at and engaging, and that sparks a response or provokes some sort of thought. And I think most of the fun in the game came from that personal engagement. That's also to say, like, putting this in front of middle school or high school students would probably require some significant tweaking on that front, as well as maybe a little bit more structured. Hi, for middle school students, you each saw a document describing cancer rates among multiple generations living in New Mexico. What are your thoughts on that? So there's a very complex answer to how did we balance fun to the clarity of the message. One, we got lucky that the message is multiple perspectives exist. There are ways to talk through that. And two, we were lucky that our audience likes to stare at things and think really hard and come to complex conclusions about those things. So
yeah, I think
sorry.
I can add on. Sorry.
Yeah, I can also add on a little bit.
Yeah, I can
But
add
yeah,
a
you
little
go
bit
first.
on that side first. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so for how to balance the fun and clarity, because we're making a transformational game, so our priority, of course, is the clarity of the message, and that's what we did at the beginning stage of our whole process. We kind of, at first, we have a paper prototype with like all the artifacts and all the words that are written down, and then after that, we made sure that we have a clear message of our game and how do we want to transform the players. And then on that, we start to have a technical build, and we start to add like animations and different art assets, and also like sound and different type of element to make the game that looks better and more fun to play, and so the player can have a feeling like they're exploring the room. So yeah, that's how the development works for us to balance the fun and the clarity. We start with the clarity first, and then we add step by step how to make the game fun. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, another thing I want to add on is that like in the very beginning of the design process, we know we're going to make a transformational game, but we also use like an escaping room kind of game as our reference. But we certainly realize that we are not trying to keep our audience away from the artifact that we are hiding in this environment. We definitely want them to find them, but we also want them to enjoy the process of exploring everything and finding everything themselves. So like the locations of the artifact that we finally decided to put on, we did like some like tests and see like where people can find it, but they probably should take some time to find them, but it's not super hard for them, and it's not like they can eventually find everything that we are hiding there. And another indirect control that we put there is that if you can see there's drawers of the table, like we try to put like a fingerprint or like a handprint textures on it as like a hint or a sign, so people can just see those signs and want like think about if there's something inside. So by doing that, we believe that they will like it will be easier for them to find the artifact, but it can also give them like a sense of achievement that they actually find everything themselves.
Yeah, that was a good question. We can go on to Roger's question. Minimum amount of players you would suggest for the game overall. And per team, I like to think about it per team, because that is sort of what we ended up testing, was only one, 2 or 3 teams at once. We did do a playtest with all 4 at the very end, but it becomes a lot more reliant on whether you have extroverts on the team once you get below about 5 people per team. 5+ will lead to good conversations sort of regardless of team makeup, but less than 5, yeah, you do sort of like have to make sure that the people you have are people who want to talk to each other. So putting that all together, 4 teams, 5-ish per team, 20 players minimum is a really good number. Is this something we intend to release to the public in its current state or in the future? Bringing Jack on board as someone who wasn't a designer, who did play a part in presenting and facilitating, was really interesting and instructive. And I think that we did a good job of preparing him to play this facilitator role in a relatively short amount of time. But I think we'd have to, in order to release it to the public and say, like, anyone can facilitate this, we would have to be a bit more thoughtful about the instructions we're giving to the facilitator. That's sort of the big barrier, as well as server space, and what server this is on. The server it's on now is sort of not intended to be forever.
Right. Also the pulling the programming curtain back. One hurdle to overcome if this was released publicly is the entire networking backend is built in Google Sheets, which was hilarious and great for a thing like this. ostensibly a public release version would want a more featured or a more
something
robust
a bit more robust
server
let's
backend,
say that
multiplayer
yeah.
backend, networking backend. I do want to get to Raphael's question just because I think that's the last one in the queue. Did you consider adding as a stakeholder group, citizen groups, companies that are usually contracted to implement government actions, or political lobbyists who impact policy, or was that too big of a scope for the project? Just off the top of my head, it used to be the Department of Labor instead of ICANN, so just kind of that thought of nuclear tech development is good because it stimulates the economy was originally captured by the Department of Labor. We actually pivoted more towards a non-government organization at the suggestion of our client Raul. We have a lot of government orgs who go kind of from the top down to the citizen level. Wouldn't it be really interesting to see what, going from the bottom up in a sense, right? ICANN's big claim to fame is receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for convincing over 160 countries to sign a binding agreement to never develop nuclear weapons. So they are perhaps one of the most successful anti-proliferation efforts within modern history, to their credit. It was also too big of scope for the project. So
yeah. So actually communicating with ICANN and things like that was something that we tried to do, and we did communicate with the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium, which was the source of a lot of primary source material about effects on downwinders. But pulling back the curtain a little bit more on ICANN, the way that we framed it within the game wasn't just this is a group of policy people who talk to the UN, but also this is a sort of umbrella organization that has a lot of local level partner organizations. And so within the game framing, we framed it as if you send money to ICANN, what it's doing is ICANN will distribute this money as grants to its partner organizations on the ground, which there's 60 or so in the US, peace organizations, downwinder organizations, etc. But yeah, overall, sort of adding in as stakeholders to our design process, very specific groups was a bit out of scope considering the length of the semester and difficulty of setting up meetings and things like that.
I do just want to call out time. We are exactly at our 30 minutes. I'm very proud of us. We made it to a deadline for once. Yeah, Roger, comment. I can see something like this working as a framework for educating both students and citizens and getting them more involved in various policy decisions. Thank you. That was one of our big goals. And we're really glad that this 30-minute chat conveyed that. So if there's any last thoughts, I feel as though the shepherd's crook is going to pull out from off stage and pull us out of here. But thanks so much for coming out, those who could make it. We're so glad we could talk about this and really hope you guys got something out of this as well.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to connect with us further, let's actually just put in chat our project website that has all of our contact information and whatnot on it. So let me just grab that real quick, and I'll put that in chat for any follow-ups offline.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a couple minutes if folks want to stick around for any last second questions, but thank you all so much. We'll release you to go about and enjoy the rest of the Games for Change Festival.